Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into a really fascinating text that breaks down the Islamic jurisprudential framework around intimacy, specifically looking at the deep legal distinctions between consensual zina and rape. We'll be looking directly at how the source material outlines historical evidence gathering, the sentencing structure, and the philosophical defense of these laws against modern critiques. It's a highly structured framework, and we're going to unpack the whole thing step by step. Here's what we're covering today. First, the difference between zina and rape. Second, modern and historical proofs. Third, punishments for zina bil jabr. Fourth, refuting secular objections. Fifth, absolute laws versus ijtihad. And finally, tying it all together into a complete system. Let's get started. Section 1. The difference between zina and rape. To truly grasp the legal framework presented in the source, we first have to clarify the absolutely critical distinction the author makes between two very different acts. So the text establishes a really clear boundary here. On one side, we have zina, which the author strictly defines as a consensual act that is kept hidden from society. But on the exact opposite side is zina bil jabr, which translates to forced intimacy or rape. The source is very explicit about this. Rape involves the use of force, physical harm, blackmail, deceit, or even drugging the victim. It is categorized fundamentally differently than a consensual, hidden act. And understanding that difference brilliantly clears up a common misconception that the author actively debunks. You know that famous rule requiring 4 male witnesses or a confession? Well, according to the text, that applies only to consensual zina. Why? The author suggests this is actually designed to protect privacy when an act is hidden and consensual. But for forced rape, the requirement completely flips. Because it involves force and harm, the legal system relies on circumstantial evidence, physical signs of trauma, and the extent of the victim's injury. The source points out that just like you wouldn't need 4 witnesses to prove a robbery took place, you literally don't need them for a rape case. Section 2. Modern and historical proofs. Now, what's really fascinating about this next segment is how the text uses historical case studies to prove that relying on circumstantial forensic evidence isn't some new invention. It's deeply rooted in Islamic tradition. The author points to the famous Quranic story of the prophet Yusuf, or Joseph. The text highlights that when Yusuf was falsely accused, an expert pointed out a crucial detail. If his shirt was torn from the front, it meant he was the aggressor. But if it was torn from the back, it meant he was trying to escape, which would prove his innocence. Well, the shirt was torn from the back. The author uses this exact story to show that the divine framework inherently validates logical, circumstantial evidence to establish the truth. Building on that, the text provides another really incredible historical example. During the time of Umar, a woman brought forward a rape accusation, presenting a stain on her clothing as undeniable proof. But Ali, another prominent historical figure, did something super clever. He poured boiling water on the stain. The heat actually caused the stain to solidify and turn white, revealing it wasn't semen at all but egg white. This exposed the fabricated accusation on the spot, and it demonstrates a very early, highly logical form of forensic investigation being utilized in Sharia law. And the source notes that this historical precedent seamlessly applies to our world today. Modern Sharia judges are actively instructed to consult experts. For example, if an unmarried woman is pregnant, that is treated as undeniable proof that intimacy occurred. But to identify the actual perpetrator, judges are told to utilize modern medical science and DNA testing. The text even gets into complex, exceptional modern scenarios like test tube pregnancies, whether accidental or malicious, stating that judges absolutely must be informed by scientific experts to render accurate verdicts. The old 4-witness rule is entirely bypassed when undeniable scientific proof exists. Section 3. Punishments for zina bil jabr. So the crucial point here is, once the evidence is solidly established, how does that actually translate into sentencing? Well, the author describes a highly sophisticated matrix, rather than just a single blanket rule. The text maps out the logic of the punishment by compounding the crimes. It's not just treated as one single act. It goes like this. Step 1. The act of force, deceit, or harm is treated as fasad, which means creating mischief or chaos in the land, kind of akin to armed robbery. Then, step 2, the illicit act of zina itself is punished. And finally, step 3, if the perpetrator actually murdered the victim, that adds yet another intense layer of punishment to the whole thing. The author outlines these escalating punishments strictly based on the perpetrator's marital status and the level of violence used. If the rapist is unmarried, they receive 100 lashes and a year of exile for the zina, plus the punishment for fasad, which, depending on the severity of the violence, can mean amputation from opposite sides or even the death penalty.
Now, if the perpetrator is married, the Zina punishment becomes stoning to death, again combined with that facade penalty. And if a murder occurred, the law of qisas, or equal retribution, is applied right on top of it all. As you can see, it is a remarkably severe, multi-layered sentencing structure.
Section 4. Refuting secular objections. Having laid out this intense punishment structure, the source material then pivots to directly address and refute some specific external critiques of this legal system. The text tackles one very common secular objection head-on, and it's a valid question. If the penalty for rape is death, won't criminals just murder their victims to silence them and cover up the crime, since they're already facing the death penalty anyway? Well, here is exactly how the author refutes that argument. The text argues that criminals who commit these acts already possess a psychopathic psychology. However, the urge to actually murder a victim to cover up a crime really only thrives in societies with poor security and weak law enforcement, places where criminals feel they have a realistic chance of escaping justice. The author asserts that a properly implemented Sharia system inherently creates a secure, default environment that prevents this chaotic psychology from taking root in the first place. So from this perspective, the flaw isn't in the severe punishment itself, but rather in the chaotic environment allowed by secular law enforcement. Section 5. Absolute laws versus ijtihad. To explain why these strict laws cannot simply be altered or watered down by modern critics, the text delves deep into Islamic legal philosophy, specifically looking at how divine law is categorized. The author uses this brilliant software engineering analogy here. First, we have qati laws. These are absolute laws taken directly from the Quran and Sunnah. The author calls these hard-coded, meaning they absolutely cannot be changed, opposed, or overwritten by human logic. Conversely, we have zani laws. These are interpretive issues where scholars use ijtihad, or critical thinking, to figure things out. Because of that, zani laws are subject to human error, bias, and differing schools of thought. The text warns that external critics often intentionally blur the lines between these two categories to confuse people about the hard-coded rules. And the source posits a really strong theological warning regarding these hard-coded laws, referencing the story of Iblis, or Satan. According to the tradition, Iblis refused to bow to Adam because he arrogantly believed his own logic, that being made of fire made him superior, was better than God's direct command. The text emphasizes that opposing, objecting to, or trying to override a law's absolute, qati laws out of human arrogance is fundamentally an act of kufr, or disbelief. It's viewed as a total rejection of divine authority. Section 6. A complete system. Let's look at how all of these elements build into the author's ultimate thesis about how Sharia must be viewed and evaluated by society as a whole. The text concludes that debunking external critiques requires a massive shift in perspective. You simply cannot judge Sharia by taking isolated rules out of context. Instead, the author presents Islam as an integrated, complete system, referring to it in modern terms as a system as a service. Think of it like a complex software architecture. To actually reap its intended societal benefits, the entire system must be installed and allowed to function as a unified, cohesive whole. And that brings us to the end of our breakdown today. I'll leave you with this provocative thought derived directly from the author's perspective. If a legal code is meticulously designed as an integrated system as a service, where the evidence rules, the historical precedents, the multi-layered punishments, and the societal security all interlock perfectly, can we ever truly evaluate its justice by only looking at a single line of its code? It certainly challenges how we analyze complex legal frameworks. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and as always, keep questioning the wider system.